Today we're going to turn this LS3 into a monster thanks to Frankenstein Engine Dynamics. Stick around. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the garage. It's been a while. Glad to be working on something again. And honestly, I've probably shot, I don't know, a couple hours worth of content on doing this build, and it all turned out to be crap. So here we are back again. This is the LS3 that we bought for the Monte Carlo. Brand new motor. It's got less than 5 miles on it. Literally used it to drive the car down to storage, and then it got taken out of the Monte Carlo. So we stripped it down, put a set of 311 monster heads on, the non-boost monster, because I don't know if we're going to run boost on this, and Brian Tooley cam. So this thing is going to be pretty potent whenever it's said and done. I'm shooting for maybe about 600 at the crank with this. Fingers crossed. But we've got all the parts in place to make big power. Today I want to talk about a couple things with the Frankenstein heads. And we'll get a closer look at these in a second because these things are absolutely gorgeous. Now, there's an old adage out there, an old mentality of whenever it comes to heads, we look at the CFM that they flow and then we double that, and that's the maximum power that the heads are going to make. That doesn't really work out. Now, the thing about LS's is they have good heads from the factory. This came with 821s, which are a great head. And in fact, Frankenstein has a CNC porting program for the 820 heads that make them flow dang near as much as what these are going to flow. So the question is, what's the benefit of actually spending a little bit more money and going to these heads? Well, the flow numbers are not the only thing that we can really go off for power. Whenever, that's a great indication of how good the heads are. But we need to keep in mind some of the other stuff that's going on in this case, like the exhaust ports. Let me get this thing kind of rotated over here. These things are huge, and the design, the way that air moves through these heads is going to be so much more efficient than even the stock castings that you're going to see better airflow. Remember that this is just an air pump at the end of the day, and what we're trying to do is optimize its ability to bring air in and expel air out the exhaust. And whenever they design these things, that's what they're taking into account. After they get that all kind of sorted out, then we're looking at the CFM numbers and stuff like that. Now, these things, as I said, are probably good for around 700 to 750 naturally aspirated. They obviously make a boost monster version of this head. When choosing, if you're running boost, yeah, go with the boost monster. If you don't know yet, this is still going to be an upgrade over about anything out there. These guys spend a lot of time on testing these heads out, and Frankenstein will be the first one to tell you that if something doesn't work, they go back to the drawing board. They're not going to put out something that does not improve power and that is not a better piece of equipment to bolt onto your motor. And when in doubt, call them. They are the experts. They will tell you exactly, if you give them the mods that you're using, your output, your goal, what you're trying to accomplish with your heads, let them know, and they'll tell you, hey, this is the head to go, or, just porting the 821s that you had would be better. So before we take a closer look, and in particular, I want to talk about the push rods on this because these do sit a little bit higher than the factory ones. Your factory push rods are not going to work in this situation. In fact, I've got a factory push rod in here right now, and if I push the rocker all the way down into the stand, I still have slack, so I can't even zero lash this thing out. It's not going to work. And so I've gone out and I've got a measuring push rod. This is a 7.8 to 8.8. Should put us right in the range because I think we're going to be around 8-inch requirements on there. Now, do your own measurements. Something else to keep in mind, this is a hydraulic lifter, obviously, and so we're going to use the Thompson Motorsports method of checking our lash and measuring our rockers out there. If you are going to use the old style of putting lightweight springs and rotate that thing over and test everything out, be aware that the comp cam spring compressor that bolts down and normally pushes the intake and exhaust at once will not work. You'll need to go out and get one that mounts where the rocker arm mounts in order to compress the springs. And that's because we have raised receivers for our valve covers. In this case, we're running Brian Tooley racing valve covers on there. Nice, good looking setup. Give you a look at those. So that's something to keep in mind. But as I said, you don't have to do that. There's a way of using a torque wrench to actually measure it out and figure out what size push rod that we need. Something else to keep in mind, if you're running a setup like this, factory length spark plug wires are going to be too short as far as the car ones go. Now the truck ones should be long enough to reach. So if you're buying aftermarket spark plug wires, in which case I've got a set of Brian Tooley Racing plug wires over here, and I found this out the hard way. This is the car style setup. Boop, 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 boop. Just not quite long enough. By the time everything gets plugged in, it's going to be pretty tight. LS truck wires are about maybe an inch longer. So keep that in mind whenever it comes to getting your spark plug wires. By the way, what do you guys think of the new organized garage? It's great, isn't it? On top of the heads, I've gone ahead and installed the Frankenstein valley cover and the steam port kit. And I only managed to mess up one AN fitting. This one back here. Oops. I'll tell you what, these AN4 fittings are the hardest AN fittings I have ever assembled. But essentially, whenever we get done, this will go out to our radiator, allow us to get steam off of all four corners. You are going to need a four-corner kit. Even if you don't run a Frankenstein one, the back ones are already drilled out for steam ports. The other nice thing about running this valley cover is it has an adapter for the oil boss, oil pressure sender on there that kicks it out at an angle, makes it easier to get to. Whenever you get the manifold on these things, these can be a pain to access when it's installed in the car. Not saying it can't be done, it can, but this makes life a lot better. So now let's dive in here, take a closer look at measuring the push rod lengths for our 311 heads. Okay, now that I've got the rockers out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and drop a couple push rods in and verify that we're at top dead center. We should be, but I have a sneaking suspicion that we may not be, because if I drop in my push rod length checker, we're high on the intake and we're low on the exhaust. The exhaust looks like it's probably on the base lobe. Intake is on an opening lobe. I thought I had this thing locked out. I mean, I do have it locked out, but I thought I had it locked out at top dead center. Let me get my lock off. These things right here are worth their weight in gold. You can pick them up on Amazon. They're an LS flywheel lock. They work on both sides, and they index off of one of the bell housing pins. So now that I got the push rods in there, I can watch them as we turn this thing over. Okay, our intake's going down. Should see the exhaust come up. Okay, the exhaust's starting to come up. I'm going to go ahead and back it off. Okay. Now that we're on base circle for both, we'll go ahead and measure the intake side first. And you can tell that the factory one is just way too short. Our checker, our 7.8 to 8.8 push rod length checker, is about, I'd say, half an inch longer. So we'll go ahead and drop that in right now and make sure I grab the right rocker. That is the wrong rocker. It's the offset one. There we go. And it doesn't look like we're going to get there. Even without tightening this thing down, I can see that we're on the cradle, but we still have too much slack. So I need to extend this length checker out. So let's go out about that much. Drop the rocker back on there, make sure everything's centered, make sure we're in the cup. We're on the cup of the lifter. And now it looks like we can actually run this thing down to 0 lash. So, this is a way that I learned to do this from Thompson Motorsports. And what we're looking for here is side-to-side play, but no up and down. That's 0 lash for a hydraulic rocker. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a torque wrench, set it to 25 foot-pounds. We're going to start at 12 o'clock. And what we're looking for is between 1 and 1 1/4 turns before we hit 25 foot-pounds. So that tells me that the push rod is too short. We got to 25 foot-pounds. Push rod is too short, which means that we're actually torquing down before we're engaging preload. So let's back this back off and extend our push rod a couple turns. And we're going to be close, so I'm only going to come out like 2 twists. We don't want to overshoot it. We want to work up to it if we can. So we'll run this back down to 0 lash. And as you can see, I ended up doing a CHE trunnion upgrade on this instead of a roller. It's a bushed trunnion. A lot easier than a roller if you do this by yourself. Okay, we're back at 0 lash. We've got side to side, but no up and down. And time to check it again. By extending this, now we're getting into the plunger before we get into the cradle. And we've gone too long. So almost 2 full turns. You noticed 2 full turns on the adjustment of the length checker did a lot. So we overshot it. We'll go ahead and tighten it down by 1 turn and kind of go from there. Pull this out. And this thing does have indexing lines so you can kind of see where you're at. Gives you an idea. That's 1 whole turn there. Okay, we're back at 0 lash. Here we go. Oh, it's snugging up a lot better this time. Still just a hair too long. Just a hair. We've gone past 3 o'clock, so we need to go just a smidge shorter. So, going off our indexing lines, we're going to go 1/4 of a turn shorter. That's it. Because as you saw, 2 turns made a huge difference whenever it came to setting preload. Okay, here we go. 1, we're looking good. Right there, boom, good measurement. Hopefully we can find a push rod that's this exact length, but since we kind of ended up at 1 o'clock, that means if we have to go to the next size that's shorter, it's just going to move us closer to 3. We'll still be within spec. So I'm going to be super careful about pulling this thing out so we can measure it. I've got a big dial calibrator I picked up from Harbor Freight. The battery's dead on it, so we'll have to eyeball it, but it's better than nothing. Better than measuring tape. Pull this thing out. And we're clocked still at about 1/4. I'm going to do this over on the table. So we know that we're in the 7 to 8 range, so I'll go ahead and take it out to 8 so I can squeeze it down. And we actually are coming out at 8.15 inches. So I'm going to write that down, and then we'll check our exhaust port to make sure it's the same. We haven't adjusted that at all, and hopefully this thing just does exactly what we expect. Now, if you're running roller rockers on here, you're definitely going to have to use the spring compressor, but since we're not, we're running the factory style, we can do it this way. So check our 0 lash, make sure that moves, and let's give her a turn. There's 1, and okay, so it went a little bit further, and that could be some error on where we started on 0 lash. We could be just 1 flat back. Keep that in mind, but we do have a good range now for both intake and exhaust. We're going to run the same length for both. Luckily, there's plenty of 8.15 push rods available. In fact, I'm looking right now at a set of comp cam high-tech push rods. They're 3/8 diameter, hardened with ball ends, 210 bucks for the full set. I'm getting ready to order that up and get them on the way so we can finish assembling this motor. Before we jump off here though, let's take a closer look at the ports so you can see exactly what I was talking about. The design on these things is amazing. Now, I know at first you're going to be drawn to these green, I'm guessing they're Viton sealing O-rings for the exhaust, but the big thing to pay attention to is the port size itself. These things got to be at least 20% larger than factory. And that's where you're going to see the most change on these versus a factory head is these giant exhaust ports. They're going to reduce back pressure. They're going to help with scavenging with the correct cam. In this case, we're running a BTR Stage 3 NA cam. So we should get really good scavenging as long as we have the proper exhaust system to work with this thing. Look at all the work that's been done all the way back down into the valve guide. Man, it's just such a big change. Now, on top of that, I can't remember either the intake valve or the exhaust valve. I think it's the exhaust valve is a little bit larger than stock. I'm pretty sure that the intake valve is the same size. Correct me if I'm wrong, as always. Kind of kicking it over and looking at the intake size. These are going to be a little bit closer to a factory head casting size. Obviously, there's a lot of port work that's going back into the throat of the intake. A lot of smoothing, and if you look down there, the way that they've got a ridge going to the valve to help divide air before it actually hits the intake valve itself, a lot more efficient. And that's what I'm saying is, these heads combined with the cam, you're going to see a easier ability for this motor to move air. Even though these flow numbers may not be significantly bigger than a ported factory head, that is not the whole truth whenever it comes to picking a head. You've got to take into account how the intake and the exhaust works. And honestly, if there's an easy way to show you some modeling of the exhaust working with this combination, I would. Maybe I'll set that up on DynoSim because we can actually see reversion and stuff like that that's going on with these heads and this cam. That's where the big change is going to be. This is going to increase our efficiency quite a bit. So hopefully this gives you some good insight on why we put these heads on here. I want to thank Frankenstein Engine Dynamics once again for partnering up with us and sponsoring us on the LS3 build that's going into our 68 Camaro with the HP Tuners core. I'm super excited about it. This is going to be probably the most powerful LS/NA that I've built. You know, we're getting very close to big block Chevy numbers. And in fact, we're taking a 502 out of the Camaro. This was probably, I'll go ahead and say it, this is going to make more power than the 502 that's in there right now, while being a couple 100 pounds lighter, more efficient, better gas mileage. That thing probably gets 10 miles to the gallon. I bet we get almost 18 to 20 on the highway with the correct gearing with this thing. What else? Like, it's just such a clean package. It looks so good. This is something you're gonna wanna pop the hood open and take a look at, show off to your friends whenever you're at the Cars and Coffee or whatever. Next, we're going to have to pick what intake manifold that we want to run on this. Obviously, the intake manifold, the factory intake manifolds flow very well, but with everything else that we've done, we want to make sure that we have the best opportunity for the heads and cams to work. Bar none, a head cam upgrade is the best money that you can spend on an LS. It really unlocks these things. To give you an example, this is a 430 horse LS. They offer this crate motor, GMPP does, in like a 465 or a 470 horse, and the only difference is the cam. Literally just the cam. It goes over to what they call the hot cam. We've gone beyond the hot cam, and on top of it, we've got these beautiful heads to make it all work. Listen, I'm going to get back to it. You guys know the drill. Thanks for stopping by the garage. Remember, ABT, always be tuning.